Welcome to another episode of Hemp Barons. I'm Dan Humiston, and on today's show, Joy is joined by the world's leading hemp authority. They talk about her unlikely journey from the Midwest to Canada in pursuit of her calling. This is a truly rare opportunity to hear hemp insight from the foremost authority of this amazing plant. Let's join Joy's conversation with Anndrea Hermannun from the Ridge International Cannabis Consulting.
Well, welcome to Hemp Barons, Anndrea. Thank you for being with us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a particular treat because you are my mentor. You are truly the global first lady of hemp up there in Manitoba, Canada, a gal from Joplin, Missouri. And I really am feeling honored to be able to do a show on just Anndrea Hermannun and your contributions to the hemp movement and what you're doing now. And with most folks, you know, I always like to start with what got you interested in hemp. It's just that your particular story of your interest in hemp and how you pursued that passion is one of the most inspiring stories for me in life, not to mention in the hemp movement. So could you explain to the listeners a bit where you were and when you got interested in hemp and how you were advised in high school to move forward with that passion?
Yeah, fortunately, during my high school years in Joplin, Missouri, in my senior year, I had accumulated enough credits to be able to go basically a work-study half program at school. So that gave me time to get out in the real world, work at jobs, and start to hone in a little bit about what made sense to me. And I learned about cannabis and marijuana 13 years or so, and I saw the benefits, and I also saw some of the damage that it could cause with uncontrolled and youth use and these kinds of things. And when I got into university, that's really when it started to become a passion for myself, and I started to learn about, you know, hey, we have this Lexington, Missouri, this Battle of the Hemp Bales. What's all this legacy that we have in Missouri particularly? And then, of course, Jack came out with The Emperor Wears No Book, the Emperor Wears No Clothes, and my mom, thankfully, she believed in me for always, and I found the book at the library, and then, of course, I took it back, and when I wanted it again, it wasn't there, and so I hunted it down in Springfield, Missouri. So my mom and my brother drove up to Springfield, and we got the book at a little hemp store. And that was in the early sort of 1995, 1996 time frame. And during that time at Missouri Southern State, now University, Dr. Jim Jackson, my lead professor, he said, you know, Anndrea, you have to declare a major, because I'd been floating around between biology and some chemistry, and I thought, well, maybe political science, but none of those as a standalone academic study really called out to me. And he said, you know, you have to declare a major. And he said, I want to know what pisses you off. I want to know what you get up every single day and you just feel like, oh, I'm just like kicking the soil. I mean, like, what can you do about this? And I said, it's this hemp thing. And he said, Anndrea, go make it happen. And I took that as like, I don't know, it's like I got the chills right now. A sign just coming down on me that I needed to do something. And so I got online and you know, back in the early days, so we're talking in early 19s. And then I said, okay, I'm going to 1990s. I'm going to put myself out there a little bit. And so I just made a simple email and just said, my name is, I attend school at, and I'm interested in information and contacts concerning an internship working with industrial hemp. I put my professor's information and I hit send. And I didn't even tell anybody. I just did it, and I went home that night, and I came to school the next morning, and I was going to university part-time, and I was working, and I lived on my own, and I was supporting myself. And I never knew that when I got to school that next morning that my life was going to be forever changed by the Parkland Industrial Hemp Growers. Sue Schlingerman in the office that she got a feeling the night before, and when she went into the office in the morning, there was my email, and it didn't even say like, Anndrea is so great, I'm a hard worker, I love hemp, I'm going to come work on a hemp farm. It had nothing to do about that. It was just about seeking an internship. And Sue said that she knew that feeling that she got from meditating, and she said music came to her and some light came to her, and she said when she got to work, she knew that that's what it was about, and she called the Federoches with the Parkland Industrial Hemp Growers and So overnight, my life changed, and by the next morning, we were calling Sue in the Parkland office, and she said, absolutely, we could facilitate an internship for you this year. And that only happened, not to mind what Sue sensed, but because there was a family, a host family, that was willing to take in a Keene University student to allow me to come into their home, live with them in the summer, work with them, especially being a girl not from a farm. I was raised in low-income, HUD-funded apartments. So I didn't have that knowledge going in, but they opened their doors, opened their hearts, and opened themselves to sharing what I needed to kind of get my foot in the door. And if I would have had an internship helping somebody make their hemp soap, I would have felt like I made it anyways. But that internship put me in a position to develop my own major in hemp economics, and then to sort of be able to take that platform and build my academic career around industrial hemp.
So amazing. And they didn't just give you what you needed. They were giving to the planet what hemp needed, because the prolific manner in which you have paid that knowledge and that goodwill forward. But as a foundation, I just want to make sure the listeners know, because, of course, these names like Parkland Industrial Hemp Growers, all of that is so common to you. But I don't know if it was made clear to the listeners that is in Canada. And so Canada, of course, had begun to legalize and regulate hemp in 1998. But prior to, Parkland in Canada, it sounds like, was already starting to do research. Is that the case?
Yeah, they were part of the leading growers, farmer groups that started to form. In 1998, the hemp regulations came into effect in Canada, and there were some growers that started in Ontario, and then in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So it was this very sort of lined up growth pattern that occurred, where there were groups of pockets of areas where producers were coming on saying, hey, like, we're interested in this crop. What is this crop all about? And that's how the Parkland Industrial Hemp Growers was developed, birthed, came to fruition. And from that, we in Canada have a Canadian Seed Growers Association, which puts out, in conjunction with the hemp regulations, the list of approved cultivars for cultivating hemp. And you have to have, the cultivars that you're growing have to be on that list. So that means you need to have breeding programs. So they had a breeding program that was part of this farmer cooperative, because they needed to develop varieties that were going to work in the prairies, because we were using varieties that came from Ukraine mostly at that time. And there was a need to develop varieties that were going to be regionally specific. And that's fortunately what I got to work in with the Parkland Hemp Growers, also with the Parkland Crop Diversification Foundation. And that is a provincial and partial federal government run agricultural research extension service office, and they did variety trials and crop trials on numerous crops that were being grown in the Parkland region. So I got to work directly with the Parkland hemp growers and their diversification foundation and their different students in working in the breeder plot and in the variety trials.
So fascinating. And we've also had, of course, Ruth Shmai on the show, and I know how instrumental she was in all those early days, and then, of course, in bringing forth the industries. So now we're caught up with sort of your bachelor's. Let's move on to now you're this inspired Joplin, Missouri girl, taking all of her passion, bringing it to Canada, where she actually has an opportunity to work with the plant, unlike here in the United States at the time. And now you want to move into your master's. So let's tell the listeners about how that evolved.
Still tied in with the Parkland hemp growers. I had been working with Peter Dragla, which was their plant breeder at the time. He's since passed away. And Peter, I was really engaged in, and I found a deep passion for what was going on in plant breeding. And I thought, this is real. This is calling my name. This is what I want to do when I grow up. This is what I want to do in the hemp industry. And Peter was such a great mentor to me. So from that, Peter said, hey, Anndrea, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to move for? And I said, I'd love to become a plant breeder. And he says, let's make this happen. So fortunately, through the Canadian federal government, they had the Growing Forward program And that basically is a funding program that can help different areas in agriculture. This could be production, manufacturing. You can apply in different formats. So I applied underneath the academic program and was thankful enough to gain funding underneath that federal banner to pay for my university studies. And prior to that, I needed to come to Canada. So I became a provincial nominee through the provincial nominee program. And that program is set up so that unique skilled workers that have traits that aren't known to be prevalent or available within the current Canadian society. This program has helped to kind of fast track people to be able to come into Canada to do this work. And it is a provincial program. So through the Manitoba government, they basically wrote a letter saying, hey, Anndrea has these skills. We need these skills here. We need somebody who can come and help train other Canadians to do this work and help build these industries. And then that allowed me to use that letter as a platform when I applied for my immigration. And so in 2004, I immigrated to Canada and have been here ever since. And then that set me off on the path to start some pre-master classes, because when I was in my bachelor's, I didn't take genetics and I didn't take statistics. And so there were classes that I needed to take to prep myself for my master's work. So I started pre-master's classes, and then in 2008, I earned my master's of plant science for hemp fiber agronomy.
And essentially, the Manitoba government paid some 80 or 85,000 Canadian dollars for you to accomplish that, and then share that knowledge throughout the country and, in fact, North America.
Yeah, it was actually the federal government, because that was a federal government program, Joy. So it was the federal government who actually extended that. And you have to fill out the applications and everything of that. So they awarded that to my program.
Just wow, so amazing. And then the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance formed. So now we move forward into industry. Do you want to share with us then how your career at that point begins to unfold at the same time as industry begins to take root? Canada quickly starts to make itself, because they have federal crop insurance available to them right out of the gate when federal regulation legalization occurs in 1998, quickly start to position themselves as the world leader in bulk hemp food ingredients and hemp grain processing. Explain to us how that unfolds, and the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance. And of course, in 1994, on the U.S. side, the Hemp Industries Association had founded itself, but in 2000, it becomes an actual nonprofit mutual benefit corporation in California. So all this stuff is happening at once as you get your master's.
Right. So, yes, I'm in Canada, and I became very entrenched in what was happening here and how to be able to really progress the Canadian industry. And I also saw what that impact it was having on the global platform. So I was fortunate during my master's project to be part of the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance. And then in 2007 through 2008, I became the interim executive director for the association. During that time, I was finishing up my master's program, and then I was also starting my work at Hemp Oil Canada, which Hemp Oil Canada really put me out there. I was traveling to all the trade shows. I was doing all of the events. I became sort of I was sales, I was marketing, I was information specialist, industry liaison, and also an agrologist. And in 2005, I became an authorized hemp sampler, which I am still to this day. The regulations have changed, so the way that program is administered is a little bit different. But regardless of that, starting in 2005, I started traveling across the Canadian prairies sampling hemp, and that gave me an opportunity to meet the farmers, meet the growers, visit the crops, see what was going on out there really in the field, which also put me in a unique position to be able to discuss what's happening in the processing facility and the marketing and the food side for my work with Hemp Oil Canada. And I started, working in the packaging department while I was in grad school and just picking up some extra hours. And I really loved that, the immersion that it put me in so that my voice could be heard. And so thankfully, it became a voice that was very well respected, and I did and am continuing to do my best to represent hemp in a fashion that brings people in, makes it feel very inclusive, and letting people know that your hemp dreams can come true also. As you know, Joy, living the dreams.
Oh, so much so, so much so. And then eventually you go on to be the president of the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance, as well as the president of the U.S. Hemp Industries Association. Did those things ever sort of cross each other? Were you at one time, were you the president of both organizations at the same time, or did they always, were they separate, or did they overlap?
They were separate. I mean, overlapped in the case that I was sitting on the boards of both of those associations or on special committees, but mostly on the board side. But those executive positions, those were not at the same time. And eventually I did have to say, when things started happening in the U.S., and I had to look at my schedule and say, okay, where do I need to be now? I had done what I felt I needed to do, particularly at that moment with the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance. And I said, okay, I have to pick one of these that I'm going to now start to try to step into a more leadership position. And at that time, I stepped down from the board of the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance and stepped on as a more active role with the Hemp Industries Associations. And sometimes we as professionals, we have to make those decisions. But I can say that, it was an honor from the side of the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance. Even early on in 2009, I was the recipient of the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance Business Builders Champions of the Industry Award. So very early on, I had made the efforts in the Canadian industry, and thankfully the CHTA recognized that early on. And in 2010, Canadian Government Investment Champion for the hemp industry. 2011, I was granted my citizenship here. And also in that year, I became a champion of the New Rural Economy in Manitoba. So it's definitely, during those years, I was putting as much effort as what I could to drive the Canadian hemp industry, which spilled over to the work that was happening in the U.S. and the collaboration that was happening in the EU.
Yes, and now we're really starting to get up there in the baby being born here of the hemp revolution globally. So now we're up to around 2010, 2011. Let's talk about hemp technologies and Oregon State University. Tell the readers about those two projects, endeavors.
Yeah. Well, we have Hemp History Week, which that's the National Grassroots Education Campaign from the Hemp Industries Association. So during that time, when Hemp History Week was kicking off, I was working with Hemplo Canada, and I got a phone call from these guys down in North Carolina saying, hey, we want to do this hemp beer. And I said, oh, who are you? And they're like, oh, Greg Favau, Hemp Technologies. Like, oh my gosh, I've been watching you guys from a distance, and I love what you're doing. And Greg says, oh, that's great. We'd love to bring it to Canada. So from that birthed my relationship with Hemp Technologies. At that time, David Madera, which has since passed, and Greg Favau, which is now out there, he's helping lead that Master Hemp Creek Builder and putting that information out there. So from that relationship, I became entwined in what was happening in hemp building verse and how we're now taking that to the next level. And boy, when we started back then to what it looks like now, we've definitely grown leaps and bounds on the hemp building side, working with you, Joy, over the years and doing our base training, which has just been a joy. And I know we were just celebrating the anniversary of doing our first workshops in Canada this past November. So it's great to be seeing that industry growing, and now we have a national hemp building association. So seeing it really develop into what will be a opportunity for builders to build happy, healthy, breathing homes.
So much so, mold, rot, fire, pest resistant, optimal indoor air quality, durable, reusable, lasts for hundreds of years. No need for indoor heating or cooling systems with a 12 to 18-inch wall, depending on where you are located to a pole or an equator. But I want to make sure that the listeners know that North Carolina, what was happening, why they were calling you from North Carolina, of course, Hemp Technologies built those first permitted hempcrete homes in the United States. The first one for the mayor of Asheville, North Carolina, who still lives in the home, and you and I were blessed with the ability to tour that really gorgeous home on that mountainside. Such a great thing. So, and I know you're still involved. I love it hearing you. We've got herd on the water, Joy. We've got containers of herd coming across the water, and so excited, of course, to be able to provide people American-grown hemp now that our farmers can cultivate it here, and more infrastructure is coming up to process that long, strong stock. So how did the Oregon State University opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. And Joy, we wouldn't, and that knowledge is also tied back to Steve Allen, of course, who has, put out the hemp building book and has really laid that base platform for the inspiration. His book is one of those. If you look at Jack's book and then you look at Steve's book, I mean, those were books that really helped shape that first knowledge base that a lot of people dip their finger in to learn about different aspects of the hemp industry.
The Bible, so to speak, that really just inspire people and lay that foundation. 110%, sister. What an important pioneer he is to this day globally.
I want to take a quick break to thank you for listening to today's show. As the exclusive Cannabis Podcast Network, we're constantly adding new cannabis podcasts to support our industry's growth, and that's why we're so excited to welcome the Seed to Sound podcast to our network. The team at Seed to Sound has produced over 50 exciting and thought-provoking cannabis podcasts, and now you can listen to all their previous episodes and all their new episodes at MJBulls.com. So welcome, Seed to Sound, and stay tuned for new, exciting cannabis podcasts on the MJBulls Cannabis Podcast Network.
So tell us about Oregon State University and how that opportunity unfolded, because now we're really talking about not only you giving of yourself and answering calls and emails for all of those years, but now Oregon State comes along and says, let's put this information on blast.
Right. So I departed from Hempo, Canada in 2012. And from there, I said, what am I going to do? I need to do something. So I started my consulting business, the Ridge International Cannabis Consulting, in 2012. And also in 2012, our dear friend and hemp comrade, Dave Sieber with Hemp Shield, reached out to me and said, hey, Anndrea, I've been up to Oregon State University, and they're launching this e-campus program for wood science and engineering. And I said, okay, wood science and engineering, that's interesting. I've always thought myself wood science is a plant, and but I always thought myself more on the plant side, the crop science side. I said, okay, this is interesting. He says, and they are developing an e-course, e-campus curriculum, and they would really like to include hemp as part of this course offering for online courses. I said, oh, this is interesting. They said, would you want to do the lecture on agronomy? I said, that would be great. That's right in my wheelhouse. Love to do that. So we started going down that path, and I started asking all the questions. How do we do this? When's this due? How's this done? Tell me more. I need information. And at that time, Dave was really not in the position to take the leadership role that the course needed. And so the university came to me and said, hey, Anndrea, you're really engaged in what's going on with this. Would you like to become the instructor of this course? And that's phenomenal for an opportunity to actually become an instructor at a university level, teaching people in an e-campus framework that you're able to reach so many more students than you would as bricks and mortar. I had students in India. I had students that were military, ex-military, students in course, students coming back, non-traditional students, traditional students, bricks and mortar students, stay-at-home moms, coming back to the workforce, you name it. We had so many students of different backgrounds that were able to bring their perspective in. So that course launched, and we're now we're probably around 5,000 students that have taken that course since 2012. I guess part of the things that happen with working in universities is sometimes you get the thumb put down on you. And this was a situation with Oregon State. With the most respect to the Wood Science Engineering Department, it was out of their hands. But basically, because the regulations surrounding cannabis, hemp, and marijuana at that time were not federally in our system. And so there was this fear that the Oregon State University would lose their federal funding because I was teaching about the cultivation of a controlled substance to students that were not all in the state of Oregon that had its own regulations. And I know, Joy, we spilled over this many times and shed some tears and thought we might have a sit-in and all kinds of different things because Joy and Courtney Moran, a lawyer and former student, both of these gals, both Joy and Courtney, took the class. They really stepped up to bat and helped me try to fight this because I thought, how can we have a course and a renewable materials section talking about renewable materials, and you're making me remove the agronomy lecture. It was something very close to my heart, and the school came forward at the end of the day, and the ultimatum was, 1, we canceled the class, 2, you remove the lecture. Those were the only 2 options at the end of the day. And so I went for the high road and said, why should I prevent students from learning all of this other great information? And the course is not just about me teaching. We were able to pull together experts from all different fields of the industry to disseminate and share that information. So I'm not talking about hemp plastics. That's Dr. Chad Ulvin from North Dakota State University. Dr. George Webland from Minnesota talks about genetics. So I wanted to bring the other professors and other areas of academia to share the actual knowledge about their areas of expertise. So from that, the course continued, and we had to remove the agronomy lecture.
No, and Steve Allen did building, and Dr. John Simonson did nanotechnology, and I was very honored to be able to do the legislative and regulatory pieces. And when they removed that agronomy, I remember, and it was even called a Canadian case study. You were like, it's not even. We're discussing how they grow hemp in Canada. Like, this isn't even a direct agronomy lesson. And I remember the issue being, well, the policy states that we can't be co-conspirators. Essentially, teaching the students a Canadian case study in hemp agronomy is teaching them how to cultivate a controlled substance, and we, Oregon State University, cannot be a co-conspirator in that. I mean, just really, really something. Do you know whether to this day is the agronomy section back in the course?
It is not back in the course, no. And thankfully now we do have a lot more information that is available to the students. The funny thing, though, about it was that one of the assignments was a creativity project, and that allowed the students to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about and explore hemp in ways in their own creative thought. Or, hey, I want to do broadcasting. I'd like to do a report about hemp, and so you can do that. I want to write a song about hemp, so you can do that. I want to make a game about hemp. You could do that. So it was an opportunity for students to take and look within themselves and say, what really interests me about hemp, and I want to present on this. And they could do that in multiple fashions. So the interesting thing is that the students, even though I couldn't do a lesson on the cultivation, if the student themselves wanted to do a report on cultivation, then they could, and I could legally provide them the feedback that they needed to constructively give them the constructive criticism to move their project forward. So it was a very interesting spot where it's like, then I'm happy to correct students on and not proper information because they didn't allow me to teach the students the correct information in the first place. So it became a kind of double-edged sword, and I had to get over the hurt feelings on it and get on with the business of helping steward these students down their life journey.
Absolutely. We don't let anything we will work around it. We are patient women. As long as we are moving the hemp ball forward, we will do it. And now we look at, also Professor Jane Noller, who is just such a global rock star and advocate of this plant from Oregon State University, just watching all of that unfold. Well, in the few minutes that we have left, Miss Anndrea, and I cannot wait to have you back on. Anndrea and I are working on project and many more to come that we'll be very excited to unveil to everybody. But in the limited time that we have left, why don't you tell the listeners where you're at now, a little bit about hemp production services, and certainly how to get in touch with you for the Ridge International Cannabis Consulting.
Absolutely. So with TRIC, T-R-I-C-C, the Ridge International Cannabis Consulting, I started that in 2012, and it is what I say is my arm to helping hemp dreams come true. And that is, if you call me about, you want to build with Hempcrete, I'm going to get you over to Hemp Technologies. If you call me and you say, hey, Anndrea, I want to have a hemp-based food product, I'm going to direct us over to Hemp Production Services, and they are a bulk hemp ingredient supplier. And if it's something that falls outside of those scopes, then it becomes something that is underneath my consulting business, which I like to help make those hemp dreams come true. And that could be bouncing ideas off of me, helping me proof something, thinking about where can I source these products, where can I sell these products, or just having somebody to kind of be the devil's advocate in a way and say, well, what about this? And what about this? So that's been a great facilitator to help drive the work that I've done since 2012, and being honored from all of that work, inducted into the Hemp History Hall of Fame, the first woman inducted in 2007. I was honored with the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Hemp Industry Association in 2018. And then in 2019, one of the top 10 advocates of the last 10 years from Hemp History Week. So those last three honors that I've been given has really shown me that the work that I have done has been respected, and the work that I still need to do is needed and wanted. And that's really, it feels good, especially I became a mom, and my life has transitioned from not being able to be on the road so much. And how do you still keep yourself important in your own self and important in the work that you do when you're having these major life changes? And thankfully, just like hemp, it grows and transforms and becomes new in its environment. And thankfully, that's what I've been able to do as my career has transitioned from being that student back in Missouri to having my master's program, and now sitting at this desk and talking with you, Joy. So it's been a very great journey, and blessed to have so many colleagues like yourself and others that have helped me, guided me, called on me, and at the end of the day, respected me and respected this plant.
Well, Anndrea Hermann, words do not do justice to the gratitude for the sharing of knowledge and information, inspiration across the globe. You have assisted with drafting law and regulation all over the world, multiple countries, multiple states. You are a fountain of chopping the wood and carrying the water for the reemergence of the world's most versatile, valuable crop. And I will never be able to thank you enough. I cannot wait to have you back on this show, Anndrea. Thank you for everything you do for hemp every day, sister.
You're welcome. And to all the other hemp barons and hempsters out there, hemp, hemp, hooray. Much respect.
Hemp, hemp, hooray.